Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming to today's webinar, Technology and Democracy, How to Navigate Our New Landscape. We are at Interfaith America are truly grateful to have you here and really excited for this conversation today. My name is Scott Rasmussen. I'm a Democracy Initiatives Consultant with Interfaith America. Just to set up the conversation a little bit, technology plays a significant role in how citizens in the United States and around the world engage with and participate in their democracies. Everything from how we vote to how we get information about candidates and issues. And that technology also influences the collective confidence we have about the future of a pluralistic democracy. So today we're going to consider the responsibility and role of people of faith and conscience in shaping that influence of technology. We have a wonderful panel and that will consider these questions, and I'll introduce them in just a moment. Just as a brief introduction to Interfaith America, we are delighted to host this conversation as part of our Vote is Sacred Fellowship. Interfaith America believes that religious diversity is a foundational American strength, and we are working to build an America where people of faith, no faith, worldviews, and traditions bridge divides and work together for the common good. The Vote is Sacred Fellowship is one of our programs and brings together a religiously and ideologically diverse group of leaders to center faith and ethical convictions to inspire democratic participation and confidence. So we really hope that today's conversation can be a model of what engaging across difference of opinions and ideas can look like, and will inspire you to think about how you in your own community of faith or conscience can participate in democracy in healthy ways. Just two words about on logistics, and then we'll get started. First, the chat is open and available to the audience to engage with each other throughout the conversation, and we invite you to do so and to keep your contributions charitable, kind, and appropriate. And then second note, if you have a question for the panelists, please use the Q&A function. We will collect those and feed those to the panelists during the Q&A portion, which will come about halfway through the conversation. We also collected some questions during the registration process, and we'll introduce those into the conversation as well. So with that, we'll introduce our panelists. We will put a link to their bios in the chat so you can see the full range of their experience and background, but we will ask each of them to introduce themselves and say just a little bit about what brings them to the conversation today and what they're thinking about. So I'm delighted to introduce Greg Epstein, Humanist Chaplain at Harvard and MIT. Greg will serve as our moderator today for our conversation. Suhail Khan, a Senior Fellow at the Institute for Global Engagement. Sunita Viswanath, the Executive Director at Hindus for Human Rights. And Sigal Samuel, a Senior Reporter at Vox. So thank you to each of you for being here today. And Greg, I'll turn it over to you for introductions and to get us started.
Well, thank you so much, Scott. It's a pleasure to be here with you and Interfaith America and these wonderful panelists and anybody who might be listening today. So I just want to say a couple minutes of introduction to not so much myself, but to how this panel came to exist and what I think it might represent an opportunity to do. And then we'll have the other panelists say a bit about themselves and sort of how they come to this. Initial thoughts, and then I think it'll be fun just to have us as humans talk to one another and see what comes up. So I have worked for a little over 20 years now as the Humanist Chaplain at Harvard initially, then at Harvard and MIT, clergy for the non-religious. Working in interfaith settings. I've been in interfaith leadership roles at each university, on and off of them, in fact, and really believe very deeply in the work that initially the IFYC, Interfaith Youth Corps, now Interfaith America, as its expanded title and mission would indicate, do, and just really love the organization, love the founder, Ibu Patel, and many other folks who are there. And when I was asked to participate in this Vote is Sacred Fellowship, it was sort of a no-brainer in the sense that my remarks in 2020 at the virtual Democratic National Convention, where I was on an interfaith panel speaking about the role of religion and faith and ethics, people of conscience, et cetera, in the what became the Biden administration. What I framed my remarks around was the idea that the vote is sacred, that it is sacred to me as a non-religious person and to my community as non-religious people. I was the chair of the group Humanists for Biden Harris at the time. And that's really what I wanted to speak about. So, and I do think that it is a bipartisan frame. I'd like to think that in the, the very best way possible, that this is something that we can agree on across the aisle. And so when I got to the Vote of Sacred Fellowship convening in Washington, D.C. a few weeks ago, what I wanted to talk about was something that I've been thinking a lot about the last few years. I've been writing a book called Tech Agnostic: How Technology Became the World's Most Powerful Religion and Why It Desperately Needs a Reformation. And it's published by MIT Press, and I've been doing a lot with MIT in particular around the book, in addition to all sorts of other dialogues. But let me just say this. Um, Religion, democracy, and technology. These are three huge categories that encompass so much of what it is to be human, for lack of more time to say more about that for now. And I think religion and democracy are a pairing that have been, that's a pairing that's been explored quite a bit in my lifetime. The impact of conservative religious movements on presidential and national politics in the United States and many, many other places, liberal and progressive movements and how they interface with, religious movements, that is, and how they interface with democracies here and elsewhere. Also great interest to me and to many. And then there's technology and democracy, which is a burning field right now, where more and more scholars are going into that field, more and more activists are taking part in that field, and where it's becoming increasingly clear that tech is having an enormous impact on any and all efforts to create sustainable democracies. Then there's tech and religion, which is an interesting field that has also existed for some time now. In my book, I trace discussions of that topic back to the 80s and beyond, although as my fellow panelist Sigal and I would, I'm sure, agree, it's actually a conversation that goes back hundreds, if not thousands of years. But I've become fascinated with the ways that Silicon Valley tech, a certain kind or style of tech that has its roots, let's say, in the 80s and 90s, has begun to itself look like religion or act like religion. And I'm lucky to be able to turn, rather than explaining that to you myself, I'm going to turn to one of the best writers in the entire world to explain that to you in a moment. But then you have the idea that all three might come together: religion, democracy, and technology. What if they're all interacting with one another in new and increasingly influential ways? And what if it's really becoming difficult to envision any one of the three of those components without imagining or discussing or understanding how the other two are playing a role in shaping it? That's sort of what I'd like to discuss today. We'll give it, the better part of an hour. We'll see where we get with it. We have Sigal, who I'll turn to in just a second. We have Sunita, who is one of, my favorite leaders in a world that represents 1.2 billion people. The Hindu community it's an enormous force in the world, and you're coming to it from a human rights perspective. You're not a tech expert, but you are a human rights and Hinduism expert, and I'm so fascinated to see what's coming up for you around this topic today. And then Suhail, you're a Christian,
Well, I'm a Muslim.
uh, uh, yes. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Yes, of
I'm a
course.
Muslim at a Christian think tank. Yeah,
Yes, you're,
that's confusing.
yes, of course. Yes, I mixed that up. Sorry about that.
All good.
You're a
Okay.
Muslim, who's, I would say, is deep. I mean, I was thinking, as I was looking at your LinkedIn today, you were, from a while ago, you had done a response to somebody who was having trouble getting a chat bot to talk about the glory of God. and you posted something where you got the chat bot to praise God in a certain way. And I think that's why it made me think about the Christianity thing. Sorry about that. But you're a Muslim who, for whom these issues are also very salient. You're a senior person at Microsoft, and also a senior person in Republican policy and governance circles. And so we get to hear from somebody who's on the perspective of I would say the winners these days, of where many of these issues are headed. I'm fascinated by your perspective, and I'm looking forward to talking with you as well. But Sigal, I'd like to turn to you first, and just get your initial thoughts. And then I've got questions for you that we'll do first, but we'll do your initial thoughts, and then Sunita and Suhail, and then we'll take it from there.
Great. Thank you so much. It's really nice to be here with you all. I will just say, by way of background, I've had a sort of unusual trajectory in journalism. I sort of studied philosophy and religion, and was, for the majority of my career in journalism, have been a religion reporter. Used to be the Atlantic's religion editor. That was really what I spent most of my time on. And in the past half dozen years or so, I've made a sort of funny transition into more tech reporting, science and tech, and specifically AI and AI ethics. And on the face of it, that might seem like a strange juxtaposition or a strange shift, but it's actually been really fascinating for me to discover how many parallels there are between those two pieces of the triangle that, Greg, you were mentioning, the tech piece and the religion piece, and we'll get to the democracy too. I think one thing that has really jumped out at me in my AI reporting in the past few years has been, and this is not a point that is original to me, other scholars have made this point beautifully, that AI, and more specifically deep learning, is inherently conservative, in the sense that algorithms are sort of leading us deeper into the rabbit holes starting from a place that we're already familiar with. So if you think about recommender algorithms, whether it's on YouTube or whatever it is, they're leading us from one thing that we have already indicated we like or are interested in, to things that are sort of adjacent to it or connected to it, and we end up going further down a rabbit hole. And often people get radicalized this way and end up from a fairly innocuous video on TikTok for moms about how to make healthy meals for your kids, to something about like autism and vaccines, to the anti-vax movement, and suddenly they're in QAnon territory, right? So I think a lot of us are somewhat familiar with this, but I think it is helpful to set us up for this conversation in the sense that when we think about the technological context that we're all living in right now, we really have to ask, how free and fair are elections really, if we are being implicitly coerced down certain paths and not others? And whoever has the power or the money or the platform gets to decide which path people are going to be ushered down. I think that's a more familiar observation that some of us maybe have heard before. It's a problem for civil society, but I think it's especially a problem for tech regulators. So maybe there are some of those folks listening today. But the second observation I want to just put out there for us, and Greg sort of hinted at this a moment ago, is, and this I think is really important for the folks amongst us who are operating in religious communities. Greg sort of hinted at this idea that Silicon Valley's vision for AI is basically religion repackaged. A lot of us have maybe heard this idea that, after what Nietzsche called the death of God, we're living in this disenchanted kind of modernity where we don't have a vision of something that's sacred or something beyond the self that is worth dying for, not just living for. I don't think that I don't think that idea of disenchantment is quite right. I think that we have just shifted our enchantment onto other things. And I think the big winner in modernity of that, what managed to capture that sense of enchantment or seem imbued with magic, is technology. And you see this a lot in folks nowadays in Silicon Valley, whether it's Elon Musk or Sam Altman, when they talk about AI or this artificial general intelligence that they hope to build, they talk about it as if they're talking about building a new god. And they talk about sort of building AI that can morally enhance human society and the human individual, that can make us better at reasoning, better at living, and that can kind of usher in a utopia. So it's sort of like a worldview that emphasizing using data-driven technology to perfect society or humanity. But I think that the perfectibility of the human person is a very dangerous idea. It can lead into fascism and sometimes even eugenics. And it's really in tension, I think, with democratic ideas, because the idea in democracy is that we should maintain space for a plurality of different views and different ways of being in the world. I think religious traditions can offer us a strong corrective here. We have thousands of years worth of thinking about how we are not gods, we are not angels, we are humans, and that is good, and we are humans for a reason. So I'd love to sort of put that out there for now and then brainstorm with you all about how religious traditions can maybe offer a countervailing view to what we're hearing out of Silicon Valley these days.
Thank you so much, Sigal. That's there's so much there to discuss. Let's turn to Sunita, where again you're coming from a place where your tradition is perhaps not paid enough attention to in the United States' context, but representing such a huge part of the world and where technology has become more and more influential, in Hindu society, culture, et cetera. So what is coming up for you today as you have this conversation introduced? Are there areas that that are more resonant for you that you'd like to discuss? Are there questions that are coming up for you? Just give us an introduction to your interest in participating today.
Of course. Thanks, Greg, and thanks everyone. Well, honestly, I was born a Hindu, an upper caste Hindu from South India that grew up in England, and my extended family lives across the globe. Our WhatsApp includes people from our family WhatsApp channel includes people from all across India, England, America, Australia, other countries in Europe. Whatever information is flowing through my sort of very personal space is just, traveling all across the globe, which is really fascinating when you think about it. And I, for me, my faith, my Hindu identity, until about 15 years ago, was intensely personal, not something that I would wear on my sleeve and go around creating an organization called Hindus for Human Rights. This is not something I would have ever thought I would be doing. And the reason for this path that I'm on right now is a deep, deep fear and concern about the fact that in the Hindu community at large, and I mean across the world, there is we are being hounded with information, misinformation, disinformation, outright lies. It's spreading because of technology.
Sunita, can I just ask you is there a way that you could turn up your own volume? People are asking for a little bit better way to hear you. So I want to make sure we don't miss more of what you're saying.
I might just have to speak more loudly.
All right.
Because this is the top volume.
All right.
Yeah. So what I was noticing in my community, my global Hindu community, is that there was more and more spreading of distorted facts that I could recognize as such. And even more scary than that was that they were reaching all across educated, less educated parts of the community and actually having traction. Along with that, there was this very rightward shift. So Hindu nationalism, what we call Hindutva, which is currently the ruling regime in India, the BJP government. It is the ideology that motivates them. It is a Hindu supremacist ideology. Over these 15 years during which I have been publicly identifying as a Hindu, this ideology and this regime has gotten stronger. And we should be aware that this Hindutva ideology isn't something that is growing stronger somewhere else in India, far, far away. Right here in this country, in America, we've just had an election, and Hindu American adherents to this ideology have played a part in the election, in the democracy, the democratic process right here. And I can tell you, I can give you sort of facts and anecdotes that that illustrate exactly how powerful and increasingly powerful Hindutva adherents are in this country. For instance, the leading, largest, oldest Hindu American organization in this country has been tweeting post-election about a Hindu Project 2025. So 1.2 billion people in the world, we in America need to pay attention to what is happening in that Hindu space. I personally, and my husband, we have been attacked directly by the BJP, that's the ruling party in India, the BJP's IT cell. The people who run that have directly attacked on social media, me and my husband, for destroying India and Israel, supposedly, because we speak our opinions. And there are so many ways in which not just misinformation, but as my colleague just told me, missing information, not just distorted facts, but just omitted facts that are framing people's thoughts and their minds. October a year ago, so October 2023, Hindus for Human Rights' X account was suspended in India. And that the largest, when you did the analytics, the country that had the most people following our X account were in India. And so it wasn't a surprise. It was very unfortunate, and we're figuring out other ways to get information, the corrective to the lies, to people who care about truth and want to follow us. But that has been closed off to us. And so there are so many reasons why technology, hand in hand with religion, hand in hand with democracy, really resonate with me. I mean, I sort of I'm doing my work and living at exactly that intersection. I was really nervous, Greg. It's no secret about coming into this conversation because I definitely do not know much about tech. But just a couple of days ago, I had the gift of going to see a play here in Brooklyn. It was called We Are Your Robots. It was beautiful. It was gorgeous. And it started with this question of, is humanity's ultimate purpose to be immortal? And then it took you through in this genius way to a much deeper question about and it quoted Noam Chomsky, is humanity actually on course to self-destruct? Are we acting in such a way that we are going to kill ourselves off? And I guess it landed me in the question which I will carry through our conversation, which is it really about technology, or is it about what intention we bring to how we use, all the tools at our fingertips? And I would, and the play definitely led me here, but for me, it's about what are our values? What do we want?
Thank you so much. Yeah, that's beautifully said. And we'll come right back to you for sure. But just to say, I'm so delighted that you're here, because one of the things that I noted, and I think Sigal was, I heard this resonate in her comments as well. Religious communities, I think it's very important to find ways to engage with them about issues about tech and democracy. And furthermore, I think religious communities, religious, spiritual, and ethical perspectives have a lot to offer to the world of Silicon Valley tech at this point. So just all reasons why we should be talking. It's great. Suhail, I mean, I have lots of questions for you. I think in many ways, I'd like to just let you start with your thoughts on, a range of these topics, because there's, I'd like to hear your basic idea for, what you'd want to share, and then we'll see where we can go from there.
No, thanks, Greg. And really grateful to be included in this conversation already. It's proven to be very provocative and raised some really interesting points. I want to say, just before I share my thoughts, just your experience, Sunita, I really want to commend you for your leadership and your bravery, for you and your husband. It's some of the things that you related are nothing short of harrowing. I've experienced similar campaigns, and so definitely feel for you. And if there's anything that I can do, of course, would be ready to help in any way. But just thinking about you and your husband. I'll say a few things. First, I've been working in the political arena for about 35 or so years. Been in DC for about 30. I'm a political person. I like what is possible, the art of the possible with politics, with government, policy. That's what brought me to Washington, DC from Silicon Valley. I'm not a techie. I got through law school without a computer. I didn't have internet until the middle of COVID. I've never owned a computer besides the one that I'm using here at work. So up until very recently, I had a pretty, taped together BlackBerry. That was my main device that finally kind of gave up the ghost. And so I had to go to the iPhone. So I'm not somebody who's an early adopter of technology, definitely not a cheerleader per se. But what I will say, particularly about AI, since that's what kind of is the real focus of what we're talking about, because that's the latest kind of iteration of technology and is, in the headlines and really the subject of a lot of both excitement and concern, and rightfully so on both sides, is that, at least from our approach here, wearing my Microsoft hat, that is, we regard AI as any technology as a tool. And technology can be used as a tool to enhance our life. It can be used as a weapon. And AI is no different. Just as, something as rudimentary as a rock or a hammer can be used to, build a chair, to pound a nail, to build something, it can be used to break a window or to hurt somebody. Likewise, AI, like other technologies, can be used for good, it can be used for evil. The technology in of itself is not good or evil. It does not have qualities that we might ascribe to it from a human perspective. It's the user that makes those decisions as to how they're going to implement and use that technology. What's a little different about AI, unlike other technologies, is that it is one that touches so many other areas of our life, whether it's healthcare, education, communication in general, elections, as we just mentioned, you know, the creation of art, music. AI can and is part of so many aspects of our life, and it seems to have happened overnight. So, besides the first thing, as I said, it's a tool, but it can be used as a weapon. Number two, I will say AI has been around for decades. Just in recent years, if you've used AI to unlock your phone using facial recognition or your thumbprint, if you use GPS or your Uber or your Lyft drivers using GPS to get you to where you want to go, if you're using voice to text, which hopefully you're using rather than just texting while you're driving, those are all applications of AI. Most of us didn't call it AI, and so it wasn't that big of a deal. We were using it. What we're talking about now is generative AI, which of course is kind of the confluence of several forces that have come together. One, that a significant portion of human knowledge has been digitized. Two, that there are these supercomputers beyond just the servers that we're aware of that house our data, whether we have a Facebook, a Gmail, or an Outlook account. But these are these super servers that can do these massive computations in a very rapid clip. Microsoft, for example, only has one right now. It's in Iowa. And the third factor, of course, is this LLM software, large language model software, that was developed right in San Francisco by OpenAI, that is able to take all that data that has been digitized, process a query from us asking a very unique, specific question, process it and very quickly on one of those servers, and then come up with a very bespoke, unique answer. So beyond just asking, hey, what's the best sushi in San Francisco? You can ask, I want you to write a poem about, you know, the sushi in San Francisco, and it'll write a very custom specific poem. You can say, I want you to put it in the, you know, in the spirit of Keats or in the spirit of E.E. Cummings, and it'll do that. So that's a very specific application of AI, and that's something that, you know, and now that's developing. I was just on a panel with a doctor from Sacramento, actually, who mentioned that as an oncologist, he's using AI because it's detecting cancer in mammograms that he misses with the naked eye. And even though he's a practicing oncologist for 2 decades, AI is enhancing his ability to spot.
Suhail, I don't want to cut you off, but you know,
Yeah.
since these are introductory remarks, like I want to make sure,
Yeah.
is there something that you want to say about the relationship with religion before we
Yeah,
turn
what I'll
back
say
to
basically,
the
yeah, and
next round of the panel?
sure, absolutely, apologize. What I'll say is that, you know, there are always cheerleaders for various technologies. I'm a car guy. I remember when Tucker thought the Tucker car was going to change the world. So, you know, I don't put a lot of credence in what maybe Sam Altman or Elon Musk might say. That's kind of, to me, that's hyperbole. That's part salesmanship. You know, to me, it's a tool. I use it in my life. Well, that's why, for example, at Microsoft, we call it Copilot. That denotes that the human is still in charge. These are technologies created by humans to be used by humans, but the human is still in charge. They're still responsible for the content. They still ultimately make the decisions.
Yep.
And so that, coming back to, you know, the religious aspect, again, humans can't be perfected. That's why we have religion. And technology will nowhere near perfect us. It can enhance our lives and hopefully, ideally, make our lives better, but it will not perfect our lives. It cannot replace religion, and that it doesn't give our lives the meaning that religion does. And so I think, you know, we need to be careful about the harmful effects of any technology, including AI, and put into place safeguards to protect ourselves. But I also think that we need to be very realistic as to what role it plays in our lives and the limited role that it plays in our lives.
Thank you very much. That's a great comment to turn it to Sigal. Sigal, you know, there was a point in the past decade where I think a number of people began to realize, perhaps most prominently around Facebook, that the service that we were using at Facebook, that we were perhaps no longer the customer, we were now the product, right? And to go a little further with that way of thinking, you know, there are certain aspects of AI or AI discourse where that purport to talk about a kind of technology where human beings would no longer be the tool user, but would now, you know, at the very least, you know, along these, you know, lines of this discourse, would be partners with the tool, which is, you know, not anything I could say about any other tool I know of. Or perhaps even the used, you know, they would be the product that the tool is engaging with, right? And you've written really beautifully about this, and I'll just say, you know, for example, you've written, it's clearly undemocratic that private companies are building tech that aims to totally change the world without seeking buy-in from the public. In fact, even leaders at the major companies are expressing unease about how undemocratic it is. And so I guess, you know, I'd just like to hear your initial thoughts about this. Like, you know, there's the tool, but what if it's more than just a tool at this point?
Great, thank you. So I'm going to try to actually weave together what you're saying, Greg, and if I can, a little comment on what Suhail said, because you both use this word tool. I would like to respectfully disagree with this notion that technology is neutral. We hear this a lot, this idea that technology is dual use. It can be used for good, it can be used for evil, right? We hear this a lot. I think this is sort of taken as a given in many quarters, but I think it's actually part of the salesmanship that you were talking about. I don't think we should see that premise. I don't think we should take that as a given. In fact, if we've learned anything from the past few years of watching what's coming out in the AI world, we see that AI, for example, is very much not a neutral tool. We see the ways that the demographics of who the people who are building AI shows up in the end product. For example, early facial recognition tech that was, you know, very poor at recognizing women, people of color. It was being made largely by white men who, you know, didn't think to question the preponderance of, as the researcher Joy Bolamwini calls it, pale male data. And we see there's structural biases that creep into the AI, right? Including the way that AI relies on historical data, let's say data about policing in a given neighborhood, and then encourages police forces, let's say nowadays, to police neighborhoods more heavily if they were policed heavily in the past, right? Which can lead to disadvantages for, let's say, Black communities, for example. So I really want to nudge us to question this idea that, oh, technology is just a tool, can be for good, can be for evil. I agree a lot with what you said, Sunita, that it really comes down to our values, what values we're building into the tool and what values we're enacting as we use the tool. And Greg, to your framing of the tool question in terms of like, who's the tool and who's the user, right? I think it does, it almost gets flipped upside down without our noticing it sometimes in the conversation. We like to think that we're, of course, the builder and the user, but we also have to think about the way that the tool is using us sometimes, by which I mean the ways that the tool and its design is implicitly coercing us in certain directions. So we'll just briefly, like thinking about ChatGPT, I think Suhail was mentioning these large language models. Sometimes, you know, ChatGPT, Claude, it can be very useful. I was just using Claude earlier today to help me brainstorm for something. But as a journalist and also a fiction writer, I always want to be careful in thinking about how is it, when I use this tool, how is it already sending me down certain thought paths and precluding other thought paths? If I use that tool too early in my like writing process, there are thoughts over here that I might never entertain because I've early on let the tool dictate for me what thought paths I should go down. And often those will be, again, conservative, as I said earlier. It will be the thought paths that are most well-trodden based on what people online in the data sets, the training data, have entertained before. And so in a way, it inherently moves me away from what could be more original thinking towards what is more historical or conservative thinking. So you can quibble with that example if you want, but I just want to lay that out as an illustration of ways that sometimes the tools are using us without our realizing it. And then Greg, you took it a step further and you said, I think this was maybe a hint at the moral enhancement piece. Some AI boosters are very excited about the possibility for AI systems to be more objective than humans, more rational than humans, and suggest that if we use AI, we should basically give the AI the ability to like make the big hard decisions of life for us because they can be more objective or more rational. I think that's a very problematic idea. We know these systems are not objective. They are going to spew out whatever was in their training data. And so I think we should be really careful about these assumptions that AI can morally enhance us. To me, it looks a lot more like us ceding to the machines what I think is arguably one of the most precious things about being human, which is our freedom, our agency. Like that's part of what makes being a human awesome.
So I want to agree with that 100%. That's why, again, we approach technology from the company perspective that the human is still in charge. This is, this is software made by humans to be used by humans. This does not have any superhuman ability to supersede human knowledge or we don't ascribe to that. Whomever is saying that it can be better or, a better way of thinking or a perfect way of thinking, we definitely don't ascribe to that, particularly because given that the information that the data is coming from is from the internet, we all know that the internet is full of falsehoods, lies, misinformation, disinformation. And so if all this data that I said has now been digitized is what's being used as the reservoir to create what we're asking for, has fallacies and other misinformation on it, of course, what will be created from that will likewise reflect that. Now, there are attempts, by engineers to try to minimize that as much as possible. But you can never, it can never be perfect because the amount of data out there is so vast. That's the first thing I'll say. So 100% agree with you on that premise. I will say, though, when it comes to the tool versus weapon, kind of duality, the data, there's no doubt these technologies are developed by people, and those people, as you gave the example when it came to facial recognition technologies, were showing that there was a bias. And I get this from conservatives, right? As that conservatives will say the AI, whether it's Google, whether it's Facebook, whether it's Microsoft, the AI skews left when it comes to the content. And that's because the vast majority of content out there is skews left. If you ask for something academic, and you're at most of your universities, I'm a Cal grad, Cal, Stanford, MIT, Harvard, they skew left, right? If you ask for something, even from journalists, I'm sure Vox has 50% R's and 50% D's, but most, journalistic publications, the San Jose Merc, the LA Times, the Washington Post, the New York Times, they skew left, right? So unless you ask the technology specifically, I only want you to rely on certain types of journalistic sites, or I only want you to use certain universities to give me and to create the answer, you're going to get information that's skewed to a certain degree of who designed the software, and or what is the predominant nature of the information that is out there in the world. So what I would say to that is that humans as users need to be aware of these realities as they are using the technology. I'm reminded as a 5-year-old kindergartner, most of the scissors in the classroom were right-handed scissors. Were the engineers biased towards right-handers? Hell yeah. Do they hate left-handers? Probably not. They just were thinking from a right-handed world, right? So if you were a lefty, you had to usually specifically raise your hand and ask for a lefty scissor. That's the world we're living when it comes to AI. So the user, again, has to have agency, has to have ownership over the technology. And just as I get on a Facebook page and know that my information is being in fact sold and traded but I still use Facebook because I'm very aware of the trade that I'm making with Facebook when I use Facebook. The human user needs to be very aware of what's happening when they use any number of technology products.
I want to ask for a little bit of interchange between Sigal and Suhail on a couple things that were just brought up. Then I want to turn back to Sunita for a last question. Then we'll have a little bit of time for audience interaction as well. But what I was hearing, sort of interesting, unexpected, that in AI circles, Sigal, there are sort of schools of thought, right? You've got your sort of more doomer thoughts. This is all going to bring us to a kind of hell. And then you've got more utopian schools of thought, right? This is going to get us to a transcendent future. And one of the things that I find interesting here is that there is also a certain circle of people, and I tend to encounter these among my fellow social justice oriented progressives, where we'll sort of say, no, neither of those two things is correct, right? That it's not about whether it's going to get us to hell or to heaven. It's about the impact here and now, the ethics of the technologies here and now. I think I'm sort of hearing that similar kind of approach from Suhail, a Muslim who works among fairly conservative Christians in Republican circles at Microsoft. And I find that to be intriguing. I'm not here trying to get bipartisan agreement on anything, honestly, but I do find it intriguing, and I would wonder if both of you would comment on that a bit, starting with you, Sigal.
Interesting. Yeah, I think it's true that what we often hear, including in the media, is this sort of juxtaposition. You've got your AI doomers and your AI hype folks, right? Boosters. I tend to think that what we should be discussing more is, I'm not kept awake every night by the fear of like the doom scenario, the AI apocalypse scenario. What does really, really worry me is all the more insidious ways that technology can negatively impact life, sometimes positively, to be clear. There are definitely positive uses. But I really worry about like the negative stuff that's a bit more insidious, that is sort of in the medium term, potentially, right? Like that is not the stuff we're seeing today, the misinformation, etc. That is not the, wow, humanity has completely gone extinct because there's some overlord, robot takeover. But there's like this whole space in the middle that I think is under discussed. And I think it's under discussed in part because it's a little more subtle and hard to put our finger on. And I think it has to do with how these technologies subtly and implicitly nudge us more in some directions versus others. I agree with Suhail that we can try and we should try to be mindful users of technology. But I think it's really hard for a lot of us, even myself. I'm a tech reporter. It's hard for me even, because the technology has its own logic. It is designed in such a way as to push your unconscious psychological buttons. As anyone who was educated around Stanford knows, there were courses specifically to teach engineers and designers how to design tech that will be addictive, right? There are specific protocols for hooking the user's mind. And that's just one example of this. But I think it's we cannot put the onus on the individual user to like be this guru who magically figures out how to outsmart the technologies that have been designed to addict us or to implicitly coerce us onto certain paths, and that know more about me in some sense that I maybe know about myself, right? It has all the Google, Gmail, Facebook, etc., Twitter, they've collected so much data on me at this point that they arguably know some of my unconscious preferences more than I know myself. So I think we have to be really careful about who we're putting the onus on. And I really think it's got to be not the individual, but private companies. And we have to be really careful with private companies that are, I'm thinking, for example, of OpenAI, where the CEO, Sam Altman, is proposing to make what he describes as world-changing technology, completely paradigm shifting, will overturn the economy as we know it. That's the claim. If someone's claiming that, we should expect that there be some democratic buy-in from all of us, we the public. And I think it's a real problem that there isn't that democratic buy-in or an attempt to get it.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite articles of yours. AI companies are trying to build God. Shouldn't they get our permission first? Anybody listening to this should read that. So, Suhail, just briefly though, what do you think about this? There's I don't hear doomerism in your perspective. I don't hear utopianism necessarily. But there is, you are in league with people who are talking about profound changes to society, and you are, a self-labeled conservative, right? So, just a quick response to that.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say that I agree mostly what was said there. Again, I do feel that in the end, the technologies, the term, for example, with TikTok is that they do design to be very sticky, right? And once you get on, forget 12-year-olds, I mean, even a grown adult, if they get on TikTok, for example, it's really hard for them to pull themselves away because the algorithms are such that has been articulated. They know what you want and they'll keep feeding you what you want. I'm a car guy, so I keep getting, posts for stuff that's car related, and they know that I like that. But I also know that, I'm being manipulated. And so at some point I put the phone down, right? Because I get what's happening. And I think that's why it's that much, important for us as users, as consumers, and particularly when it comes to children, that we take ownership of that transaction. That's why, I know families where they have no device times, they have no device dinners. And those are things that we have to take seriously. It's not just a matter of convenience or politeness. It's really a matter of mental health and social cohesion. I mean, how many of us have been in a restaurant where you see the entire family glued to their phones? I mean, that's a really sad, reality. Um, I don't know, but I would caution against looking for a governmental solution for some of those problems and put the onus on the individual or on the more micro level for taking note of that and trying to fix that. But I will say for bigger challenges that are something that government can tackle in a more cohesive and comprehensive way, there has to be policy regulation. And that's one of the things that we have learned from the social media revolution, that there it was all, world changing. It's going to change the world for the positive. It's going to connect us. It's going to, in fact, change and move towards democracies. And then we saw the child predators. We saw all the scam artists. We saw the mental health challenges, the body image challenges. And then we've been reacting ever since, right? So with AI, I do think, to Sigal's point, big companies, small companies, as we are making AI more ubiquitous throughout our lives, that we do have a moral responsibility as companies putting this technology out there, that we also likewise voluntarily build in protections. And you're going to see those protections vary company to company, and that we also promote state, local, and federal regulation that will protect users. Where we set those guardrails are, of course, something subject to a democratic conversation, and some states and some localities will be very different than others. Some schools, for example, allow for AI as long as you disclose it. Others say no AI allowed. And I think that variety should be allowed. But if you're talking about TikTok, for example, which is, an asset owned by an adversarial government, yeah, I'm in support of banning that. And I think that should not be used because there are national security risks to using that technology, not to mention all the societal risks that I've already described.
All right, we'll hold it there. It's not a tech policy forum, although it could be, on another level. So thank you for that, Suhail and Sunita. Without forewarning, I'm going to invite you to preach for a minute or two.
I,
What I'd like to hear is, I am a deep believer, I've become a deep believer that my largely secular counterparts at in big tech, although there's been some notice lately that leaders in tech like Elon Musk and Peter Thiel, et cetera, are sort of coming out as perhaps not being as secular as we thought they were. But I've still noted in many years at Harvard and MIT that the overlap and in my sojourns in Silicon Valley, that the overlap between my secular, atheist, agnostic, and non-religious community and the Silicon Valley community is overwhelmingly large. And what I've been wanting to hear is religious people, spiritual people of profound commitment to things like human rights, sharing their own moral perspective with the tech community that I think can at times be, let's say, amoral. Um, what is your message from a human rights oriented Hindu perspective to the world of Silicon Valley that has so much influence on our culture and on our lives today?
I was really struck by this notion earlier on from Sigal of, um, you know, tech making a god or being a god. And it reminded me that in Hindu tradition, when a sculptor makes an idol of a god, a deity, they always put a chink in it. They put a flaw in it. There is no there's no sense that we can make something perfect or we can be something perfect. And if there is such a thing as a God or the divine, it is in you and me, no matter who you are. It is in every thought, every dream, every idea, everything we create, every aspect of the universe. And so yeah, there's no perfection, and for Hindus, we are flawed and our gods are flawed. And we live with this, you know, imperfection, and out of this comes, you know, our life. I mean, considering that India is now the country with the most number of people, and with an increasing presence, clout, power in the world, and an outsized culpability in spreading technological mischief, lies, dangerous ones. I think it's really important for my community, for people of Hindu faith, to actually go back to the basic tenets of our faith. It says in our oldest text, the Rig Veda, let noble thoughts come from all direction. There are many teachings that say it is better to believe what you see with your own eyes, what you experience to be true, than just believe something because someone told that to you. Those kinds of very important teachings are lost. And I see in my community, and I agree with you, Sigal, we cannot blame people for this because the algorithm is set to do this to us. But people are just sort of sleepwalking through these lies. And if there's any sort of, if there's one thing that I would wish immediately, is that my people, the Hindu people, wake up to the lies we are being subjected to. Because just in that waking up, I think, you know, miracles can happen, and we can turn just a pivot a tiny bit away from this nightmare that we're in. It is absolutely not some far-fetched, it's not, it is tending towards doom. What is happening today in our world as a result of these lies, and the reception that people have, the way that they're being internalized, we have at least, I mean, I would say hundreds of people, but at least 17 documented human rights defenders in India whose computers and phones were hacked by the Indian government with Pegasus, and that those the so-called evidence that was planted in their phones and laptops led to their being arrested. Some of them have been released. Many of them are still languishing in prison. One person, Father Stan Swami, an 84-year-old Jesuit priest who devoted his entire life to serving the indigenous of India, died in custody. He had Parkinson's, and then he got COVID, and he is no longer. That is, and then the lies around Palestine in the last year that have, you know, shaped so many people's thinking about what happened on October 7th, what's happening now. Those lies are being peddled by Indian IT cell. So this is today on our planet, lives are hanging in the balance. And it is, and to a Hindu audience, if the people are listening, go back to the tenets of your faith, open your mind. That is your religious obligation, to have a clear mind. And then if there's a God, it's in you and me. There is no other. And turn away from a path of othering communities, and see God in every face that you encounter.
Thank you. Well, I did ask a human rights leader to preach about human rights, and so we got a number of examples, and I thought it was very powerful, and thank you so much. Scott, I see you on screen indicating that, of course, we've got to wrap up soon. We got one of the questions that we got is from a leader in our community, Josh Good, who asks, what are the most egregious sources of tech interference in this election, and what can we do about it?
Like, I'll take that really quickly. I mean, it's a big question, and I purposely didn't bring it up just because it's a big topic. But, you know, in my professional life, we were monitoring, going back several election cycles, a lot of the election interference from various countries, you know, and that unfortunately is a reality. North Korea, Iran, China, Russia are heavily engaged in that type of activity, not only here in the United States, but around the globe with election. And that's something that we have to continue to be vigilant about, both as governments and as individual consumers, because it is very insidious. Fake news sites are put up, stories are circulated, and it continues. Some of us saw again, AI used to fake Joe Biden's voice in New Hampshire. DeSantis used AI to fake Donald Trump in Iowa during the caucuses. So it happens. That is more, some of that's domestic, as I said, from like DeSantis to Trump. And that we need to police, you know, whether it's the Federal Election Commissions or others, and we need to update our laws to reflect that. But also from the nation state actors that I mentioned, they're out there, and that requires vigilance, not only again from our government and our national security agencies, but also from us as consumers, that we can't just accept something that we see in the internet, just as we wouldn't accept something that's on a flyer blowing down the street. We have to be really careful about what is claimed, particularly when it catches fire and it starts to have legs. We have to really ask ourselves to see what is the truth here before accepting.
Great. I want to make sure we get the last minute for Sigal. Thank you so much, Suhail. Great comments all around. Sigal, I've been on a book tour talking about a lot of these things, so I get to sort of go on for an hour or two at a time. And, you know, in this conversation, you've spoken for me so wonderfully in a number of ways. And so just, you know, on that question and on any other matter, you know, where would you want to leave us? What do you think a conversation like this needs to look to do next? You know, what are your final thoughts?
Thank you. I'll start with the last question and bring it to your question, Greg. Another one of the major sources of misinformation in this election has been Elon Musk on X. And I bring that up not to say something in particular about Elon Musk so much as to say what I think that illustrates for us this larger tendency. Elon's thing is, he says, we want free speech. Free speech should reign, and truth that should come from the community, from you and me, any random observer on the street. Maybe sounds nice in theory, but what really is happening is sort of a reality collapse. It's sort of a collapsing of the very notion that we can have trusted authoritative news sources or other sources of information, and that you can only go by what each individual says, and they're all equally to be trusted. I think that jives really well with, and it's no accident, it rhymes with this idea that we're seeing with AI and with tech generally, that I'm trying to think how I want to phrase this, but that there is no that it's all like totally subjective, and that we should just sort of cede our own sort of agency to figure out what values we want to enact, and to have some sense that there is a reality beyond us that is like that we can trust, that we can sort of empirically determine. And I think that is one of the sort of insidious threats I was mentioning earlier, is that the very idea that some technologies might be leading to this sense of reality collapse for us, where we don't know anymore what we can trust. We don't know if we can trust sort of elite news, for example. I think that is part of what's eroding foundations for democracy. And I want us as human beings to feel that we have sort of stable institutions that we can trust to greater or lesser degrees. We're not in a soup of relativism where like the random person on the street has as much authority to report on things as a very serious news organization. And that, more importantly for us as individuals, that we have freedom and agency that we should not cede to machines or technologies. We are sort of like the creatures who get to decide what we want human life to be for, what we want to do with this world. And that's really precious. And I hope that religious leaders will really see that they can have a huge role to play here in offering people countervailing narratives and stories about what it is to be human, what is human life for on this planet, so that we don't feel like we just have to pass that off onto the machines as if they could decide for us what human life should be for.
So powerful, so much to talk about. Indy, I see your question and want to invite you to run that by me. I have thoughts about that in my book, but be interesting to talk to you as well. Why is it so hard to build tech that is human centered, and all that you added to that as well. So this is only a beginning. I don't know that these individuals, all of us, will come together again. Maybe we will, but the point is, though, that to me, this conversation represents a coming together of different perspectives and backgrounds of people. It's bringing religious traditions, liberal traditions, conservative traditions, non-religious traditions together with journalism, scholarship, and all these three areas of religion, technology, and democracy. Think about what that kind of conversation could look like if it were to be expanded upon. It's certainly a fascinating start that we got off to today. So I just want to thank Scott and everybody at Interfaith America for making it possible. And what a pleasure to be with each of you.
Thank you. I'll just say just really quickly, Greg, Suhail, Sigal, Sunita, thank you for being here. Thank you to our audience. And Greg, you summarized it perfectly. This is a start. So many avenues, so many ways to explore this and approach it. And we really appreciate you modeling what this kind of conversation and so many other kind of conversations I think in our country can look like if we bring together the best of what we have and figure out how to build a better world for all of us.
And a decent amount of common ground was found today, let it be said. I mean, it's somewhat surprisingly decent amount of common ground. So anyway, good on us, I suppose. Better than not, perhaps. And so thank you all again.
Thanks everyone for being here. Have a good afternoon.
Thank
All
you.
right, take care. Bye-bye.
Be well.